So, good evening, everyone. I hope that you can hear me clearly. I'd like to welcome everyone to our South Wales West of England branch webinar event this evening. It's called Agile, Is It Worth the Risk? My name's Peter Wakeling, and I'm the member of the branch committee responsible for corporate liaison, and I'm your host for this evening's webinar. I'll be assisted by Rob Allen, who's our branch's administrator in APM, who's managing the platform for us tonight. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and you are in a listen-only mode. This session will last approximately an hour, concluding with a Q&A session. Please submit your questions via the questions panel during the webinar, and we'll be able to address as many as we can in the Q&A session later. Following the webinar, the recording will be uploaded onto our APM YouTube account, and the slides will be published on our APM SlideShare account, both of which will be listed on the branch community page on the APM website. You have to allow 5 working days for this. This session will count towards your CPD. You will receive evaluation sheets. Please do respond and let us know your thoughts about this event and what you would like to see in the future. Just now, a bit of APM information. As a branch, we are starting to plan for physical events again, and we will see how they are received. In the meantime, we are continuing with some evening webinars which provide flexible access. A reminder also of all the excellent resources on the APM website, APM Learning with resources to help develop your knowledge and skills, APM Hub, a member discussion forum, and also if you're interested or thinking about applying for chartered status, there are excellent guidance documents available. We currently have over 2,100 successful CHPPs. The branch events that we have planned are very varied, and there are full details on the APM website, constantly updated. But coming next, on the 16th of March, we have our first physical event for 2 years. That's quite a milestone. This is by Natural Resources Wales, and it covers their journey from audit to assurance, establishing a new PMO in the private sector, in the public sector. This will be at the Atkins offices, Aztec West in Bristol. On the 30th of March, we have a virtual networking event, which will be hosted by Nina Hartley, and that topic will be around the International Women's Day, which is earlier in March, on the 8th of March. And lastly, I'll mention that on the 7th of April, we're planning to hold a one-day seminar for the branch, which will be on the topic, how to kick your project off on the right track. That will also be a physical event. And we're all missing the chance to meet with our members, to network and enjoy the buffet. I'd now like to move to introducing our speaker tonight. Our webinar tonight is focused on Agile and risk. Agile seems to be of growing interest, and that's perhaps indicated, but we've had over 300 members registered for this webinar this evening. Yet Agile methods are not new. They've been around under a variety of different names for some 30 years. A common thread, I think, is the collaborative, iterative refinement of requirement and solution, as opposed to the traditional linear or waterfall project approach. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight, Barbara Roberts, an Agile transformation coach who's been promoting Agile behaviour in organisations for many years. Barbara will explain how Agile drives different behaviours and therefore poses a different set of risks to traditional waterfall approaches and how to manage these risks. Barbara, a very warm welcome to you, and I'd like to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody, and thanks for asking me to come and talk about Agile and risk. So why me? Well, I've been doing this for ages. I've been involved with Agile before it was called Agile. And in fact, I've always worked this way, even when everybody else was working traditional. What I do, though, is I specialise in Agile in the complex corporate world. So I get involved in transformations where organisations are changing towards or introducing a new Agile way of working. I'm still passionate about Agile, having been involved since day one. Started the first work with the definition of the first ever Agile approach, formal Agile approach, or rapid application development approach as it was then. in 1994, and I've been actively involved ever since, and I still thoroughly enjoy it. So one of these days I'll give up, just not yet. I'm having far too much fun to retire just yet. So I was asked to do this presentation on Agile, and the suggestion was, could I talk about risk? And I think the questions that people often want to know about Agile and risk is, what's different about delivering projects using Agile? And one of the important things to remember is Agile is not just about IT. It relates to all types of projects. So you can do an Agile project that's an entire process change, or working with HR to redefine people's roles. It could be, we've used Agile on extensions at home, so any sort of project. I'm also going to talk about how you might need to adapt risk management for Agile projects and why you do that, and then talk about how you manage risk effectively in Agile projects. So I was trying to talk about some of the differences. But I also appreciate that there's probably some of you who don't know much about Agile, or you might have looked it up on Wikipedia. I would just suggest that's not the best definition of Agile you can find. So first thing, if you do know a bit about Agile, or you've heard bad things about Agile, please don't believe all the hype you hear. So you will have heard messages like, you are now redundant as project managers because we have Agile, we don't need you. That's actually not true at all. So we still absolutely definitely need to do projects in an Agile world. If you work in a complex corporate organizations, you do project delivery, you do program delivery, you do portfolio delivery, you do business as usual stuff. So projects don't go away because you're doing Agile. And there are people out there, there was a big movement a few years ago called #NoProjects, which was saying, if you do Agile, we don't do projects. And that was one of the reasons I published a white paper together with Peter Koosmans from the Dutch project management organization and Michael from the Australian Institute of Project Management. And we just wanted to get the message out there that projects and Agile work very well together. So if you are a project manager thinking that I'm going to suggest you don't have a job in the future, trust me, you still do. We still need you. And secondly, the important thing is that good project management practices still apply to Agile. So please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And if you're told that you should retrain as a Scrum Master if you want to be useful in Agile, actually it's a completely different role. So a Scrum Master is more like a team leader than a project manager. The project managers, to me, are absolutely vital in coordinating the delivery of the work that's being done within the project. And finally, any sort of project needs to have risks managed. So it's regardless of whether you're following waterfall, Agile, or some sort of hybrid approach, we still need good risk management, because if we don't do risk management, then we'll hit most of them and probably fail. So for those of you that don't know an awful lot about Agile, I thought I'd just highlight some of the basic differences. So the first one I wanted to talk about was, what does the linear traditional waterfall style do? What does Agile do differently? So for example, with a linear project, a waterfall project, typically we fix features. So we do a detailed specification, a detailed analysis, and we sign those off, and then that's what we're implicitly promising to deliver. In Agile, we work differently. So with Agile, we fix time, we fix cost, we fix quality, and if we hit problems, what we negotiate are the features. So we prioritize them, we know which are the least valuable, least impact features, and those are built as our contingency. So it turns the waterfall, the traditional model, on its head. In a traditional waterfall project, you do big design up front. So what you're doing there is you fix all the details early. So detailed specification, detailed design before you even start working on it. In a traditional project, again, we do it differently. We do design up front, but we don't do all of it. So we often talk about this concept of enough design up front, enough so that we can size it, we can scope it, we can control the scope, the breadth, but we don't want the detail till later. So that will emerge as we go through, and the reasoning is that if we capture the low-level detail later, it's accurate at the time we capture it. Whereas with the speed of change at the moment, if you capture details early on, typically by the time you've approved what you've captured, probably the reality has changed anyway. In a traditional waterfall approach, typically you work to big horizons, so most of the thinking and the planning is long term, and we often produce plans that look very detailed for the next year, 18 months or so. In an agile project, we work to all sorts of horizons. So yes, we've got a long-term plan. We also have a medium-term plan, a short-term plan, and a plan for the next 24 hours. So we've got different focus depending on the time frame that we're looking to. In a traditional project, you work phase by phase in the linear style. So you do the analysis, then you do the design, the build, the test, then the user acceptance test. In Agile, the work is completed story by story or requirement by requirement, and we gradually build up the solution using iterative development and integrated testing. And the way we work is that with Agile, you've got continuous feedback loops that are built in. So they're an intrinsic part of our way of working. You do a bit, you test a bit, you get the business to agree, so far it's so good, and then you go round again. So we're continuously validating that what we're doing is the right thing. So those are the basic differences. We also look for different behaviours between a waterfall and an agile style. So in a waterfall project, traditional project, the business engagement is very limited. We talk to them a lot at the beginning, and then we wheel them back in at the end to do user acceptance test. And typically in the big gap in the middle, we don't talk to them much at all apart from progress reports. With an agile style, it's totally different. We engage the business very, very actively, and their engagement is ongoing. So they're engaged right from the beginning, all the way through the life cycle, up to and including deployment. They're working alongside us most of the time. And for some projects, that's full-time. If it's absolutely critical, for other projects, it's part-time. But they are, if you like, engaged with our project, involved with us, and available to us throughout. So that's a big difference. In traditional projects, in my experience working with traditional projects all those years ago, it was often that planning was seen as a PM, a project manager's activity. So the project manager did the plan, owned the plan, and showed us what we were going to be working to. In Agile, again, we do it very differently. All of the planning is done collaboratively. So when you're planning the next release of work, that plan is created collaboratively with the team that's going to deliver it. And that in itself has a very, very different feeling, because rather than the plan being owned by the project manager, the plans are owned and shared with the team. So if I'm part of creating a plan, then I've actually got some skin in the game, and it's much more important for me to make that plan successful. If I'm given a plan by somebody else and I don't believe it's possible, sometimes I'll argue, and sometimes I just go along with it knowing it's not going to work. It's different in Agile because it's our plan rather than somebody else's plan. In a traditional project, reporting is different because it's very subjective. What you're doing is you're reporting against completion of a phase. So how's development going? Well, we're about 50% through, and I think it's going quite well. In Agile, the reporting is objective. So in terms of reporting, it's what work have you completed, what stories have you completed, what demos have you got of working parts of the solution. So it's what can you show me? And I often say to the teams I'm coaching, I'm sure you're brilliant, I trust you entirely, and I know you've been busy, but show me that today you're further on than you were 2 days ago. What physical proof have you got to show me that things are looking better since we last looked? In a waterfall project, you don't get a lot of real feedback because things aren't transparent. The feedback typically is through things like progress reports. And one of the lovely expressions I learned when I was doing some Agile presenting in Australia, they kept talking about watermelon projects. And I had to sort of say, sorry, I haven't come across that in the UK. Is it an Australian thing? And they say, oh, you know, watermelon projects, green on the outside, red on the inside. So the risk with traditional is that you don't always see the truth because you haven't got the transparency to check. In an Agile project, you've got real feedback, you've got continuous feedback loops, you've got everything we do is transparent, it's built to be transparent. And we often talk about this concept of go see for yourself. If you want to see the truth, go see for yourself. That in itself can be quite intimidating if you're not used to it, because if you're used to hiding in the shadows and suddenly you're in the front in full spotlight, it can be scary. But to be honest, the honesty and the transparency of Agile is extremely valuable, although it often comes as a serious culture shock to senior management. And in terms of Agile, success is measured by completing a phase. We've completed the analysis, we've now moved on to design. In Agile, success is measured by delivery of value. Have we got an early release that we can do that gives us early return on investment? Can we release a minimum viable product to get something out into the market sooner? Are we always working on the things that are most valuable? Do we stop when we're just left with the bells and whistles that add minimum value? That in Agile is seen as success. The reason for working this way has become more and more important. If you look at the waterfall approach, the traditional approach, that was designed by Royce in the 60s. And working on projects in the 60s, particularly in IT, it was a totally different world. We never asked people what they wanted because we gave them what the technology would let us do. If you roll forward to the modern world, the world is, you often hear this expression VUCA. The world is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. So uncertainty is the norm, change is the norm, whereas historically, if you were a strong project manager, quite often you'd fend change off until after the end of the project, and that is no longer a good way of working. So for anybody that's thought recently about changing the telly or buying a new phone, you know what it's like, you do the research, you've worked out what you're going to buy, and then you think, oh, I don't know, there might be a new one coming along tomorrow, they're promising an upgrade, and you you hold back. That is the world we're trying to deliver into these days, but it's changing around us, it's changing under our feet, and we have to be able to react. So Agile's attitude to change is, don't be surprised, it's normal. It's very rare if you don't get hit any change. So at one point we shorten projects to try and get less change, but even a project that's three months long is just as likely to get hit with some changes. So you can't ignore change these days. We also recognise and accept that it is not possible or all but impossible to be 100% certain. That's perfectly okay, and that is perfectly normal. Because you've got to be able to deal with uncertainty. And you know, one of the few good things to come out of COVID, apart from making all the governments start using the word agile a lot, is the fact that you suddenly realise that change can happen. It's nobody's fault, but the world is unpredictable. And anybody that laminated a plan in the beginning of 2020 will realise that that was a complete waste of time. I was planning for 6 months touring the world talking agile, got as far as Chicago, got home, and that was it for 2 years. So the world can change around you, and you have to flex. And the first thing I did was changed all my training to deliver it across teams. The challenge actually was trying to make Lego virtual. We have found a way, but it's not easy. So it's important that organizations realize that no organization is too big to fail. Anybody can fail. And there's some big household names that have failed because they were too slow to react. So names like Kodak, BlackBerry, even Nokia. And Nokia, the entire education system and finance system of Finland was based on Nokia, and Nokia failed because they didn't see the threat of iPhones, sadly. They're still sort of there, but they're not the organization they were. So we have to almost embrace change and deal with it and say, right, well, okay, wasn't expecting that. What can we do? Rather than saying, I'm sorry, I can't deal with it. We have to be open to change. So there's this perception out there that if you're doing Agile, you don't plan, you just sort of get your head down and get on with it. And that's really not true. So I like analogies, and I often sort of use analogies to describe how we plan in Agile. And having spent 7 years working with British Rail, I like to use the railway as one of my examples. So to me, the waterfall, the traditional approach of delivering solutions, I would liken that to a railway journey. Obviously, that's a very, very modern train. That's one of the bullet trains. But the point about a railway journey is you can plan it in detail, and 9 times out of 10, it's predictable. Apart from floods, the wrong sort of snowflakes, or too many leaves in the autumn, rail journeys are pretty predictable. There's one set of rails, you can't just go off piste. And even if you need to divert for some reason, it gets complicated because you've got rails, sections of the railway where only one train can go at a time. So a traditional project, a waterfall project, to me feels like a railway journey. We've done this before. It's going to look similar to the way we did it last time. That's the route I'm planning. I can predict that. That's fine. Agile is completely the opposite. We do plan, but Agile is more like a sailing journey. You know roughly where you're going to, you know where you're going from, you have a plan to get there, but you get hit by stuff all the time. There's a lot more uncertainty, there's a lot more probability of change in a sailing journey. So I might have set out from Dover and I suddenly realised that actually I've just hit the tail end of Storm Franklin. It might be that I'm sailing along on the path I planned and there's a very large ferry coming towards me, and although I technically have right of way, I'm going to die if I don't move, so I move out the way. Agile feels like that. You're always never quite where you expect to be and constantly working out how you get back to where you need to finish up. So constantly replanning depending on what hits you. The logic and the sort of technical description behind that in a project world is these two axes, that you've got the requirements on one side, which can be close to being agreed or a long way from being agreed, and you've got the technology, whatever the technology is, the solution is anywhere from absolutely certain about this to there's quite a lot of unknown. So if a project knows what the requirements are, knows how to deliver them, and they're stable, then it's a very simple project. And in that quartile, traditional waterfall approach actually works quite well. But as soon as you start to move out from that, life gets more difficult. So you move from simple to complicated. If you try and do traditional in a complicated world, the analysts have the job of trying to pull people back into certainty. The design technology people have to pull you back to certainty because traditional waterfall is struggling. If you move out to complex, traditional can't cope with it at all. Agile is really coming into its own here. And if you're working in anarchy, most corporate organizations don't work in anarchy, to be fair. But if you're working in complex or anarchic style, then waterfall approach just simply does not work, full stop. And the best description I have of an anarchic project, worked with an organization owned by a very elderly gentleman who had the very rich elderly gentleman, but he had the mind of a teenager. And he stopped me in the canteen one day and said, "Barbara, these apps, they're good, aren't you?" Well, given that he's about 80 and I'm a bit younger than him, but not that much younger, I said, "Yeah, you're asking the wrong person, but yeah, my kids, my grandkids tell me they're great." He said, "We should have one." I said, "Okay, what would you like it to do?" He said, "I don't mind as long as it's got the brand on it." How do you spec that? How do you pin somebody like that down to ask them in detail what they want? You can't. You just have to go with it and work towards an app that, for example, has got the brand on it. So there's reasoning behind this analogy, but in the modern world, we are doing far more complicated and complex stuff than we do simple. But if it is a simple project, there's nothing wrong with doing a waterfall approach. If it is just a repeatable process, you've done it before, you know how it's going to behave, it's perfectly okay to choose not to be agile. I'm not one of these people that says everything goes agile. To me, it's about making informed choices. So different approaches to planning and how that works. On a traditional project, typically we have created very detailed Gantt charts, which the planning process usually owned by the project manager, and we created plans with a lot of detail in them, and that makes us look very, very confident that we know everything. So this low level of detail fosters a belief that the future is predictable. And in my quite long experience in doing this, this impression is often, or question mark, usually misguided. We don't know what's going to happen in 6 months' time, but it looks as if we do. And the plan makes it look as if we're not expecting change. And that, to me, just doesn't reflect the modern world. By comparison, an agile approach uses a different style of planning. And this is actually a photograph from one of our planning sessions in Finland with Nokia. And the way we plan is we planned collaboratively. And this is an example of what we're planning for here. I think it was 3 times 8 week releases of complicated software to go on, and hardware and operating system to be released onto Nokia phones. And there's a lot of getting up, moving around, putting things on walls, moving them till you've got something that looks right, then presenting it, then moving it again. But it's very, very much a collaborative activity. And when we've completed it, we might formalize it a bit more, but then we make the plans constantly visible to anybody who wants to see them at all times. Because with this transparency ethos, we want it that information can be pulled by anybody at any time without asking for a progress report. It's the go see for yourself. And our plans are updated constantly so that they constantly reflect exactly where we are now. And some of them we reflect them with things like burn down graphs, so you can see, are we on track or are we way off? And is that good or bad? And we also constantly adjust the plan to show how we're going to get from here to the end goal. So if I've moved a bit to the left because of the Calais to Dover ferry, I need to replot to get to the tip of Cornwall by tea time tomorrow. So I redo my plan, readjust my plan, constantly with a view on the end goal, but constantly adapting how I get there. And similarly, reporting, we do it differently. So on a traditional approach, you've got long periods where actually you've got no proof available. So in effect, if you're reporting against development on a large IT project, there's nothing to show, but there's lots going on. So that drives the way we report, and we end up reporting as this subjective percentage complete, because that's all we can do. And the problem with that is it's either presented from an optimistic perspective, i.e., trust me, it's going really well, or it's presented in such a way that you don't want to own up to the truth because you've got your fingers crossed that it will actually get sorted out before the problem is visible. I've certainly done that in the past, and people prefer, I've been told, we much prefer it if you report green or orange, Barbara. We really don't like it when you report red. And some project managers have actually been told to change the reporting because apparently red is a very unpleasant colour for senior management. Agile, again, is different because we've got iterative development, because we've got incremental delivery, because we've got an ethos of transparency, we can report progress through show and tells. Here, we've been working 2 weeks. Have a look at these several widgets of your new solution. They've been agreed by the business. They're ready to go live. They're just waiting for some more bits to be built around them. We have ongoing business acceptance of the requirements. So in an agile project, you cannot physically get to the end of a project and then the business refuse it because it's not what they want, because they've been telling us what they want. So the progress in an agile project is objective, based on fact, measured on completed work. And we have this concept in agile called done. Done is binary. You're either done or you're not done. If you're working on widget X, is widget X done or not done? So if it's half done, it has no value, so we don't report half done, it's this binary reporting. And that is how you're measured on success within a 2-week piece of work or a 3-month piece of work. It's all about what work is actually done. And that means developed, accepted, tested and accepted. So depending on the approach you take, that may affect what you see as a risk. Because we work so differently, things that a traditional project manager might see as a risk, as an agile coach, I wouldn't. So just to give some examples, on some projects, certain things will be a risk regardless of which way you're working. Other risks are specific to agile or specific to traditional. So an example of a shared risk You might have, for example, getting access to a limited specialist or a single point of contact. That is a risk for both linear and agile. So we would both treat that as a risk to be managed. Changing requirements, you get comments like the users keep changing their mind. For a waterfall project, that is seen as a major risk because you've fixed everything up front, and every time they change their mind, you've got to refix the documentation and potentially reapprove it. For Agile, it's business as usual. We expect the users to change their mind, but there's always the caveat of within reason. So once we've agreed the boundaries of what we're doing, which would be, if you like, the breadth of the scope, we do not allow change beyond that breadth. You can't suddenly say, you know, it's going to be black and white printers. Well, now we're going to use color plotters, because that's changing just the way we plot baselined everything, the way we're thinking, the way we're going to work. But within that breadth, if somebody says, you know, that one, I don't want that one, but I want something similar but different, but it's the same size, we just swap them around. We can give you more of something and less of something else to keep the balance. So changing requirements for Agile is business as usual. But something like maintaining ongoing business engagement for a traditional project is irrelevant because you don't want them engaged throughout. You want them at the beginning and you want them at the end. But if they're not engaged in the middle, you don't even notice. In an Agile project, that becomes a huge risk because we have these roles that come in and provide the low-level detail when we need them. And we sometimes describe our product owner or our business ambassador as the walking, talking spec. And trust me, if you don't have access to the walking, talking spec, the last thing you want is a development team trying to best guess what the business want. We've had that historically and it just never works. We need to talk to the person that knows. And that's why I always treat this as a risk, and I actually often set up formal terms of engagement with my business representatives. But we do have a number of risks related to people because in the Agile Manifesto, we talk about people and interactions being valued above processes and tools. So success in Agile is directly related to getting the right people doing the good things, the things that they're good at in a controlled but agile environment. So people become really, really important. And one of the fundamentals for Agile is empowerment. So what we want is a working team where the individuals are empowered within their personal competence. So somebody ended up doing a debate recently. It was me debating Agile against somebody that was passionate about traditional, and her argument was it would be ridiculous allowing somebody that was a junior doctor to do a heart transplant. You know, that's what empowerment means. And I had to explain that's not what empowerment means at all. You would not empower a 2-year-old to walk him or herself to play school in London. You don't empower people beyond their competence, but you empower them with the skills they have to do a really good job without constantly checking on them, without constantly getting in the way. So sometimes you might need to validate that competence. Just check, you don't just say, okay guys, you're empowered, off you go, get on with it. For example, with my teams, if I've got somebody new in the team, they're empowered, but I just keep an eye on them to make sure they're okay, make sure they've got the skills, or maybe they need a bit more help. So empowerment works, but we do check that people have got the ability to do what we're asking them to do. And empowerment has boundaries as well. You can't just do whatever you want. So if you're working in IT, you're not empowered to break the corporate tech standards that you're supposed to work to. You can't develop in pink because you think it's a nicer colour than the corporate colours. So empowerment is not a free for all. But to be effective, empowerment relies on, I describe it as a concept of a handshake. So you're empowered by those above you, and as an individual, you need to shake their hand and say you accept that empowerment. Because with empowerment comes responsibility. And if you're not prepared to accept that responsibility, then it's not going to work. So if I empower Peter to do something, if Peter's got his arms folded and looking the other way, this is not going to work. So first question is, where you're working with Agile, are management able and willing to empower others? Some cultures are very good at this, others are very loath to do it. For example, I've worked in government, and when I did years ago, I found it very difficult because getting decisions out of anyone other than committees is almost impossible. And when I did ask for somebody to be empowered at the time, it was the Department for Education and Employment, and they suggested that I spoke to David Blunkett because he was the one able to make these sort of decisions, which is in reality not going to work when he's the Secretary of State for Education in Parliament, and I need somebody when I need to ask them questions about the requirements. So we don't want command and control. That to Agile is a big risk. We want a setup where senior management trust their people and leave them to get on and do a good job without interfering constantly. And then the second thing is the individual willing and happy to take on this responsibility. And it needs validating. And I've had one person in all my 25 years of doing this, a very, very good guy, technically excellent, and we were talking about empowerment, and he just said, "Barbara, I'm not interested. I've been doing this job for ages." He said, "I don't want to be stressed. I just want to come in, do my job and go home. I'll do what I'm told. I'll do, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it, but I don't want the responsibility," which was very sad, but you can't argue if somebody's got that attitude. Normally, in my experience, people snap your hand off. And for me, empowerment is one of the huge motivators in terms of staff retention as well, because people enjoy working this way because they feel they can excel at what they're good at. So in terms of formally assessing risk, I'm using this example out of Agile Project Management because Agile Project Management is the one Agile approach that is designed around projects in a complex corporate world. So we have this thing called a project approach questionnaire, which we always go through on our projects. And it's a list of 17 questions based around things like the Agile style behaviours and what we describe as our key instrumental success factors. So we go through this with the team and we answer this. And so this is done collaboratively. Again, it's not the project manager doing this, it's the more senior roles on the project. So we do it twice. We have a life cycle where we start with a pre-project. Once the project's going, we do a feasibility, similar to other feasibilities. So we're trying to prove that this is viable, achievable, both financially and physically before we actually commit a load of money to it. So if we do the project approach questionnaire in feasibility, at this stage, there's an awful lot we don't know. For example, we've probably not got the whole team assigned at this point. So, certain questions we're going to have to at least be neutral, if not disagree or strongly disagree. So at this stage, you're going to have a lot less green and a lot less and a lot more questions to investigate. Once we've done feasibility, we go on to foundations, which is where we take the design and the analysis deeper, and we define the breadth of the project, and we work out our sort of strategic delivery plan. And we've engaged the team by then. At that point, we go through this again because we've got the basics, we've done enough analysis and design, we've got the breadth ready for the low-level detail. We go through it again, and a lot of answers will be more positive. But if things are still there, then we see those as serious risks, and we deal with them accordingly. But it's completed collaboratively. So it's the project manager, typically with a senior business representative and a senior solution representative. So in other words, somebody that's representing the technology, whatever it is. It could be a process model, or it could be IT, or it could be a business change. So we do that collaboratively, and that then feeds into our standard risk log that every project would have. So filling this in, and I usually just use colours rather than ticks, so you can just look at these 17 questions and you get a nice warm comfortable feeling that most things are green or dark green and not a lot of orange or red. If you've got a lot of orange and red, it's telling you a few things. One is Agile the right approach? Because if this looks very negative, then potentially what you might do is formalise what you've got and move into a more traditional style of working. And that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. So just to give you an example of one of the questions, the first question on the list is all members of the project understand and accept the DSDM, the Agile PM approach, i.e. the philosophy, the principles and the practices. So I'm doing a pilot project at the moment with a company based in Scotland, London and Brisbane, which is why I was up at 4:30 this morning working with Brisbane. One of the first things we did with the pilot was we filled this questionnaire in. And when we came to question number 1, they all said, well, of course we don't. It would strongly disagree. So the mitigation we organised is that I'm currently doing Agile PM training for the whole team before we move on to the next step, with the intention that everybody starts with the same understanding of what Agile is and what it isn't, and where they fit within that. So that's a sort of concrete example of Agile looking out for Agile risks, but it isn't just these risks. We still need to bring in the business as usual, the normal sort of risks, the usual suspects that will go on every project risk log regardless. So we were doing this actually right at the beginning of feasibility. We will be soon coming towards the end of foundations and we'll have completed the training. So that risk now will have gone away and it would show us as strongly agree, because we've just in the process of training up every single member of the project team. So that's a sort of concrete example of how we do this. And just a few final risks from my own experience about Agile. One of the big risks to Agile generally is that if you're doing Agile in a complex corporate environment, beware of choosing the wrong way of doing it. So the one that's most popular these days is Scrum. It's the one that almost everybody's heard of, and the reason people like it is it's very simple to explain. It's got about 3 of everything, and you can explain it to senior management in about 10 minutes. It looks very easy. But the problem with that for me is that if you're working certainly in a complex corporate environment, it's not enough. Using Scrum on its own in complex corporate is not strong enough. And if you choose Scrum, quite often the projects you see that fail, the Agile projects, are because they're using Scrum when they needed something stronger, or they're misusing Scrum and using it as an excuse not to do all the stuff they don't like the look of. And the reality is, if Agile is done properly, it is far more disciplined than a traditional approach, but the discipline is applied by the individuals to themselves. It's a very professional way of working when it's done properly. Corporate Agile is always going to be working within constraints. I always joke about, let's say that the 2 people that are managing this session today, if they decide they're going to set up a business to sell socks out of somebody's garage, it's very free. You can be very agile. You don't have shareholders. You don't have a lot of stock. And if it doesn't work, you can close down and move on. If you work in a corporate world, it's a different world. So you've got constraints. For example, you might be highly regulated. I did some work with British Aerospace and Agile, helping an Agile bid for bidding for the fly-by-wire for the Eurofighter. There were a lot of constraints on that because people die if you get things wrong. So it's understanding what room you've got to negotiate and what is definitely non-negotiable. And I have had one Agile person who needed educating who told the auditors they couldn't audit him because he was doing Agile, and apparently his Agile approach told him he had the right not to be interrupted. So I had to explain he was just being unreasonable and not Agile at all. So it's understanding what constrains you. If our Agile projects are going to succeed, we need to make sure that the management style is facilitative rather than command and control. So get a good team, set the boundaries, let them run. Interestingly, what I found interesting when I worked with the Army is that's very much the mentality in the Army. You have all the discipline, all the training, and when you're on the battlefield, you have to make the decisions for yourself based on what's happening at the time. So you are empowered, but sometimes you have to make those decisions quickly based on what's happening on the ground. So in terms of the project manager is responsible in an Agile world for clearing the way for the empowered team to work at optimum speed. So clearing out blockers, making sure they've got everything they need to work at as fast as they can, as effectively as they can. We don't want and we don't need micromanagement. And if you've got transparency, that becomes irrelevant. So we go back to this concept of go see for yourself. We've got daily stand-ups. You can see every day the team talking to one another about how it's going, sometimes called daily scrums. The project manager is very welcome to attend as an observer, but it's not reporting to the project manager. He or she is listening in. We do demos of the evolving solution. Again, the project manager may attend as an observer or watch a recording. You can go see for yourself. So it's a different style. And then finally, senior management and stakeholders need to understand how Agile works and what's different. I get fed up with being blamed for my project showing red. Hey, Barbara, why do your Agile projects always show red? Because everybody else is lying to you? Or maybe everybody else isn't being quite as open and honest and transparent as we are. So one of the things I do a lot is talk to senior management, talk to senior stakeholders about what is different, and having the what's in this for me discussion. Because what they're going to see with Agile projects can shock them initially. You know, being shown demos, being given a different form of progress reporting, being shown a graph that's accurate as at the last 24 hours, rather than a progress report that is created every week or every 2 or 3 weeks. It's a completely different style. So that's Agile and projects and risks. A quick whiz through Agile, a talk about the different sorts of risks, what we're looking for, and the sort of things that I always look out for when I'm doing Agile in a complex corporate. And that's me done.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara, for sharing a great presentation. There's some great questions and comments coming through. I'll start with Dan's question, if I may, and his is regards planning collaboratively. Do you think building a plan collaboratively in a linear setting can get the same/similar outcomes as planning in an agile setting?
I'd definitely give it a really good try, because if you're talking to the people that are doing it and they're engaged in creating it, you know, there's so many things in Agile that you can bring into a waterfall approach to add value without moving away from linear. Because one of the two key things in Agile PM, two of our principles are collaboration and communicate continuously and clearly. And we use a lot of techniques to improve that. So collaboration, if you can engage your team in creating the plan, then it becomes their plan and they take ownership for it. It might be the project manager that then manages that plan, but at least people feel that they've been part of it rather than inheriting it, and they've had an opportunity to make their views heard. So my opinion would be absolutely, definitely, yes, give it a go. And educate people into doing it, because most good people love to be more engaged than they are, and they love to have more context to what they're doing than what they often currently get.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. And Dan, thank you for the question. Ashok has asked, how do you manage the dependencies clearly? Some backlog artifacts must be done before others. PS. I know, yeah. But good to understand what the format line is, or the formal line is. Sorry.
The formal line is, if you've got Post-it notes on a wall, then I put big red asterisk on them with an arrow showing that it's either coming dependency onto this, or something is or one going out if something's dependent on that, and then you have to take that into account from when you're planning. So, for example, you don't plan things with a dependency in the same time box. You sort of, one would have to fit in the other. Or if you're dependent on somebody else, you float. You don't actually assign it in until you know you've got what you need. So we need to make them very, very visible. I mean, I like writing with bright red pen on things, but if you're doing it electronically, I'm sure there's an electronic version of a big red asterisk or exclamation mark.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. And Ashok, thank you for your question. I can see Ashok's posted another question linked to one of your slides in the PAQ. Is there anywhere that we can get a version of that? Or?
Yep. I can share with you the Excel spreadsheet. If I send it to somebody else, if I've got your email, Robert, or I'll send it to somebody else and you can stick it up there. And you know, it is based on Agile PM. So if you don't know Agile PM, then it's worth exploring it, and there's probably a good write-off about it on APMG's website. I'm quite proud of Agile PM because creating it was my idea, and there's currently over 200,000 people have done it, and we've overtaken Prince, and that's, you know, that was my job is done now.
Oh, good work, good work. Yeah, if you could share that with me, that'd be great. Yeah. I should also mention, I know Peter mentioned this, Barbara's kindly allowing us to record today's session. and we'll make a news article, and perhaps I'll add that document to that area so that everyone can get hold of it. Lisa has asked how plans and progress against plans are best documented using Agile. Projects funded by the public sector can be heavily scrutinised by auditors.
I'm probably not a good person to ask because I sent an auditor off with a nervous breakdown on my first Agile pilot project because he insisted on a Word document and I told him he couldn't have it. I gave him photographs of Post-it notes with the date on and he kept saying Word document and I kept saying no. Then he went off sick and they sent me a sensible one. We document differently, but we do document. So there's nothing in Agile that won't pass an audit. If you say to your auditors, we are following Agile PM, then they should be asking, where's your delivery plan? Where's your baseline prioritized requirements list? So if you get an auditor that understands what you're doing and asks the right questions, it's a piece of cake. So I've taken Agile through ISO 9001, and we also we're working with an offshore company, a UK company and offshore, and the offshore guys were doing a CMMI level 5, and they were halfway through, and we introduced Agile, and the only complaint they had was they had to redo some of the documentation. But we passed CMMI level 5, so there's nothing in here that is not auditable, that doesn't meet regulatory standards. You've got everything you need, we just do it in a different way.
Excellent, thank you. I don't know if you can see the nice comments coming through and what people are taking away.
I can't read them because I'm concentrating. I was reading one and then I was listening to the question. If you can send me them afterwards, I'd love to read them.
I certainly can. Someone's taken away your watermelon methodology.
I love it. I know. So. It's irresistible and it's just so true. I'd love to be in a big room full of people and say, hands up, who's done watermelon reporting? But when you're disciplined as a project manager almost for reporting red as if it's your fault, red's not the problem, black's the problem. That means we've died. Red is we're drowning, we need help. And you senior people have paid lots of money to kick open doors for us. Please react, please do something. Agile won't let you ignore stuff. He just won't.
Excellent, thank you. Mercedes has asked, what are your top tips for hybrid projects? By which I mean a large project, and then in brackets waterfall, needs to account for technical advances, and then in brackets agile.
Okay, do a hybrid. In my experience, there are 3 options all organizations have very roughly. You have a full-on traditional, you've got a full-on agile, and you've got something in the middle. Full-on agile, straightforward. Full-on traditional, it's okay, but I would pick and mix any of the agile practices and techniques out of Agile PM and take them across to traditional. So if you're doing a linear style project, we have this concept of Moscow prioritization. What must I have? What should I have? What could I have? What won't I have this time? If you take the W off because you're going to deliver 100% of features, it would be what must I do first? What should I do next? What could I do later? And you're still de-risking the way you're developing. If you can break it down into even sort of chunks that you can put on one side as here's a chunk complete, that you've done all the analysis, all the design, build, test, use, accept, that chunk work onto the next one. Even if you have one release, you're de-risking by using a sort of a hybrid. So pick and mix, don't feel constrained by I'm following this ways of working, so I've got to do what I've always done. Take the communication and the collaboration techniques, things like more workshops, more modeling, pictures rather than words, getting feedback, testing early. They produce huge value. The concept of fail fast doesn't mean I want to fail. It just means if I'm going to fail, the sooner I find out I'm going to fail, the more options I've got of what I can do with it. Failing at 5 minutes to midnight, you've got very little that you've left to play with.
That makes sense, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Vihab has asked, is an agile approach sometimes time consuming when everyone wants to pick into progress?
No, because, well, yes and no. Often you get look, I asked you for this an hour ago, haven't you started coding it yet? And that's a recipe for disaster because I used to be a developer, so I know the mindset. And you need a little bit of thinking time. And that's the whole reason we built the Agile PM framework and the model with the feasibility and the foundation up front, do a bit of exploration, stop go, and that quite often is a gated process. If you go through the gate, then you take it deeper. Don't start coding before you've worked out where you're going and how you're going to do it, because you're nearly always doing it wrong. If you start with no design up front, you will probably be very sorry quite shortly, particularly in a complex corporate world. So it doesn't have to be a big period of time, but if it's a big complex project, your foundations potentially could be about 5 or 6 weeks. But then by the time you've got all the deeper understanding, when you do start work, you're going clean and you're going fast. So it's not time consuming, it's time well spent.
Excellent, thank you.
And it's fun as well.
I'm going to quickly, there's additional questions, I'll come back to those, but just in case time runs out, Daisy has passed a lovely comment. Barbara, what an absolute wealth of knowledge. Great to hear you talk about the principles of project management in a very practical way, and then i.e. using a bit of everything that works for projects and be flexible. And there's a massive thank you as well from Daisy. Just wanting to read that one out while I could.
Just one comment. I did a white paper with my 2 colleagues on projects in Agile, not a contradiction. I'm happy to send that across if you want to share it with people as well. They might find it interesting.
Excellent.
Anything that supports project managers knowing they do have a long and hopefully enjoyable career, but we'll move more of them towards Agile, as whenever I get to talk to them, we move them across.
Excellent. Well, it's a yes for me, and Daisy's already responded to say yes, please, as well. So
okay,
that'd be amazing. Thank you. I'll jump back to the questions. Angus has said, what core risks do you consider regards financial controls and budgeting or costs, e.g., given the incremental nature of Agile? Thank you.
So the way it works in Agile PM is you've got 4 things to deal with. You've got time, cost, quality, and features. And what we agree in Agile PM is we fix time, cost, and quality. So by the end of foundations, not before, we agree the team that we're working with, that is in effect our cost. We deliver our timescale, so we know how long we've got them, and we agree the quality of everything we do. So when we hit a problem, our contingency is taken by dropping features rather than cutting back on testing or user acceptance testing. So the cost should be managed very effectively. And I've forgotten what the rest of the question was. It was finance, wasn't it? Budgeting.
It was, yeah.
I'm a very good housekeeper, and I have a thing about not giving projects all their money up front. And I think that the sensible way that we should be working in the future is we gate the money, and every time you release an increment, do a delivery, you should then go back and ask for the next round of funding, because at the moment we have a lot of this projects that I've started, so I'll finish. I have the right to finish because my project's running. And you've got projects that are delivering now the bells and whistles, and you've got absolutely critical projects you can't start because you don't have the resources. So I consider giving projects all the money up front a bit like giving your teenage child all their pocket money on January the 1st and wondering why they're broke on January the 31st, wanting a handout, and they've got a lot of electronic technology that they couldn't really afford. I don't see why we shouldn't handle the money carefully, and you should justify why you get the next round of funding. That's the way startups work. They have to justify the funding for the next piece of work. And I think we should bring a lot more of that thinking into the corporate world. I think we're too careless with the money. And I've been called in to stop projects, but once they've got their funding, how do you stop them? At least with a teenager, you can stop their pocket money or take their phone away. How do you stop a project? So I think we should be more careful with them. And I don't think that stops it being agile, but it makes it always focus on where's the value. And if they stop your project, it's not personal. It's for the greater good of the company.
That makes sense. Thank you. I'm aware of the time. What I'm going to do, if you don't mind, I'll ask one more question from Rona, who says, how do you address the client who thinks Agile is an excuse not to do the upfront thinking?
Well, it isn't. It's not an excuse not to do the upfront thinking. If you're doing something like Agile PM, it's very obvious you are doing the upfront thinking. The problem with Agile at the moment is people's perception of what it is. And I go and talk to senior execs, and I know that 5 minutes before I go in, they've looked me up and they've looked up Agile on Wikipedia. And then I spend ages trying to unpick all their preconceptions about what it is and what it isn't. I'm fighting the perception that Agile is for youngsters of about 20 who are cutting code. I have a nickname, which is the Agile Granny. Quite proud of that. It used to be Rad Mum, but I've aged since then. And I'm sort of championing the fact that Agile is nothing to do with age. It's nothing to do with IT. It's about a mindset. So we need people to understand, and I've got sessions with Brisbane coming up next week, explaining to the senior exec and the customers what's in it for them. So what is the benefit of you doing Agile as opposed to the risk of you not doing it? And it is not an excuse not to do stuff that needs to be done. We do plan, we do document, we do listen, we are open to change, but always within reason. But if you look at Agile as a way of working, human beings are agile. It's in our DNA. We're agile and we evolve. And if you bring that same common sense that you have out of work to work, then it would be a far better place because you'd be being agile.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to send you these nice comments. There's a couple of people saying they're going to surprise their workmates tomorrow with the watermelon approach, but
surprise or worry them.
Trust me, people are taking more than just the watermelon away with them. I'm going to welcome back Peter, if I may, to pass on our thanks on behalf of the APM, but also close out tonight's event. So Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Barbara. That was an excellent presentation. And could I also thank those of you who've submitted an excellent set of questions? I think that's really added to the value of this evening's webinar. I mean, some key points for me. Barbara has emphasised it's not only for IT projects. It can apply in many different areas. It's also good to know we still need a project manager in an agile project. That will be comforting to some, I think. And agile does seem to be a reaction to a world of recognised uncertainty, and that's something that is fundamental. Much of what you've mentioned, Barbara, is actually not about methods and tools. It's actually about culture.
Yeah.
It's about empowering competent individuals and having an organisation that is agile enough in its own thinking to allow that to happen. And I think that is probably one of the major takeaways from this presentation. I can recall myself, and it's a long time ago now, when I was working in defence. I had a major defence project where it was clearly evident that the user requirements were evolving constantly. And therefore, whatever was defined at the outset of the project would always be obsolete by the time we actually delivered anything. It was also a case that the technology was advancing continuously, and therefore we didn't even know beyond about 12 months what technology we would actually be employing. So I was faced with a situation of, but first of all, getting my team to think about meeting the requirements at the point of delivery, not at the time that we started the project, because they would be quite different. And secondly, I remember the challenge of getting the business case approved to start a major project where we did not know the requirements in detail for what we would deliver, and we didn't know the solution that we would be offering to meet those requirements either. That, I think, is probably encapsulates what we mean by agile and how it requires this collaborative, iterative approach to deliver the best possible outcome at the end of the day. So with that in mind, thank you, Barbara. That was a wonderful presentation, and I hope that was of value to all of you. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.